Thanks for tuning into the For Those Made to Do podcast. We are your hosts, Mandy, Sahota,
and Bianca, Pavel. This podcast is all about the doers who have achieved career success in the UAE and the stories that go with it.
In this episode of For Those Made to Do, Data and GenAI, we sit down with Harry Hurst, Data and GenAI lead at Accenture Song. We tap into all Harry's knowledge of AI, given its accelerated impact in just 18 months. He contextualizes how we as individuals can master GenAI in our day-to-day lives and why we should, emphasizing skills such as critical thinking in order to make GenAI work for us, as well as the future of what consumer behavior looks like when it comes to commoditizing our own data as a currency.
If you'd like to know why you should get your business data ready right now, how AI helped Amazon grow into a life-centric business, and what the impact of the European AI Act will be for the rest of the world, turn Siri off for a moment, sit back and enjoy. Hello everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of For Those Made to Do. Have you ever wondered how the UAE is transforming itself into a global innovation hub? In this episode, we delve into the exciting world of big data and artificial intelligence, exploring how these powerful tools are revolutionizing businesses across the Middle East. Our focus, the United Arab Emirates, a region at the forefront of technological adoption. As the world witnesses an unprecedented surge in data generation, harnessing its potential has become paramount for businesses seeking to thrive in an increasingly digitalized era. From smarter consumer experiences to data-driven decision-making, this episode will shed light on the immense potential AI holds for businesses. We'll be talking to a true industry expert, Harry Hurst, Data and Generative AI lead at Accenture Song, Middle East, to uncover the hows and whys of leveraging AI for business success. So buckle up and get ready to explore the cutting edge of businesses in the Middle East. Harry, welcome to our podcast, and I hope you enjoyed my fully AI-generated intro.
Thank you for that.
This is the brainchild of ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, because I wanted to honor the giants that brought us into the fifth industrial revolution, and for free. So I thought I should use it on this episode. We're really excited to have you here today, and we can't wait to hear all your insights. But first of all, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well this morning. Thank you very much. Yes.
Wonderful. Lovely to be sat down with you today, Harry. We do normally start the conversation with a bit of an icebreaker to get warmed up. So I'd like to ask you, what is the coolest way you've used data insights in your day-to-day life?
I love it. What a great question. And I love the fact you've used the coolest way to use data and AI insights in your everyday.
Calling me out there. Okay.
I actually do think data is cool. I think it's everywhere. And the more that we can find new and innovative ways to use it, the better for business, but also our quality of life. I've used data in lots of different ways. We all do, right? Everything from the fitness tracker that I have on my watch. I'm trying to be a bit healthy and track a little bit of what I eat at the moment. I'm doing that. A few years ago, this probably isn't the coolest thing, but a few years ago, I built a model to decide where I should move to next. With the region of London as my starting point, I entered some parameters around the time to travel to work, the cost of housing per square foot, the quality of the schooling, and time to go to see my parents and my wife's parents. And it gave me a score for different areas, which allowed me to narrow it down. Cool, I think so. But probably the coolest thing that I do is when I sit with my kids and I use some of the generative AI tools to create imagery that nobody has ever seen or experienced before, straight from their brains, straight to the screen. For me, that's the coolest.
That's love
lovely.
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Kids are very visual, so I think it's so important for them to see their vision realized in some variation, but on the screen.
Absolutely.
What's their reaction?
Absolutely. Well, this is just it. I mean, the creativity of children is incredible, and I think as adults sometimes we have that sort of knocked out of us along the way. So a few happy designers and creatives get to keep hold of that, but many of us it's knocked out a little bit. And I think we're rediscovering some of that with generative AI. But discovering my son's perfect picture of a little boy sitting on an asteroid surrounded by volcanoes and monkeys, and bringing that to life within a few minutes is just another level. It's fantastic.
Yeah, me too. So switching gears a little bit. So we've gone from what you do in your spare time. Now we'd like to talk about your professional journey. So could you tell us a little bit more about your kind of career trajectory? And you've been in the digital space for a long time. So we'd just like to learn a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's been 20 years, incredibly, that I've been in digital. And I started off working for a small business, which was bringing some of the early capabilities of the web to life. Dynamic web pages, web analytics we were one of the first in the UK to sell and consult around the topic of web analytics, understanding how people are consuming and using web properties. And it was amazing back then. I remember speaking to a marketing director of one of the most recognizable pizza delivery businesses in the world. And I offered him the ability to understand what users were doing on their site so they make it better. And he laughed at me and he said, we're making millions of dollars every day. I don't need to know. Now, fast forward even 5 years, and there wasn't a marketing director who wasn't looking at the stats and looking at the data around how people were consuming their digital properties. So, the speed of evolution has been incredible, and my career has evolved through that. So I went from there. I then worked in performance marketing business, an organization really totally driven by data of the advertising and the performance of our clients, which has been an incredible journey and led to some exploration around some programmatic media, so how advertising is created and shown to different groups of users. And over this sort of period of time, the internet was getting much better at understanding who an individual was. And as we all know, we get followed around by ads these days. And that's what it was. It was about targeting and trying to create relevance for those users. I then went to work at a startup, which was a website personalization business. I was employee 20 something, and I think we were 350 or so when I left. An incredible journey with an amazing team who were reinventing the way that data could be processed and so understand the individual and provide them again with the most relevant experience. And then from there, I to Accenture, which is an Accenture Interactive and now Accenture Song, which is a huge organization. We're 740,000 people globally, which means we cover an awful lot of territory. But for me, I've continued to focus in on using data to drive customer experience and to create the best and most relevant experiences along the way. And that's led me to this point, speaking to you two.
For anyone unfamiliar with Accenture Song, can you just tell us a bit more about the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So Accenture Song is, well, first of all, we're the world's largest tech-powered creative group, and we focus on the customer and the customer agenda, in particular around growth. We, within Song, have got really a range of functions that we perform for clients. So everything from understanding how to build the latest and greatest products and platforms for our clients. We focus on marketing, and we have some incredible creative brains within our organization. In fact, our CEO is a gentleman called David Droga, who's one of the most highly regarded creatives globally, and set up and ran an agency called Droga 5, which was acquired by Accenture a few years ago, and he's now our CEO. And so really drives that sort of mindset of creativity right through everything that we do. We help our clients with their commerce aspects around commerce, so devising, developing, building e-commerce and programs and sales. And also, because this is a focus on the customer, there's a service element as well. So we've really got the full life cycle of a consumer in mind, from engaging them right at the start all the way through to their in-life journey with a brand. And there are so many different aspects to that, from the wonderful creativity and the advertising campaigns that we drive. Here in the region in Saudi, we've just released one for Qiddiya, which is a new development in just outside Riyadh. We did the promos for Battle of the Baddest, which was one of the big boxing matches over there with Tyson Fury. And so, from that to building commerce websites, right? A huge range. But I'm really pleased to say, and my role in this is underpinning that with data. And that's either understanding the consumer or using consumer data to drive a personalized or greater experience for them.
I really love that. And just on that topic of data, I'd like to ask you a really big question that I've seen around quite a lot, which is around the importance of data out there. In your opinion, is data the world's most valuable currency right now?
I think that's a super interesting question. today I would look at data in two ways, as an asset and as a currency. The difference, the distinction that I'd make between the two is an asset is something that has got sort of intrinsic value and strategic importance. And really that's where data is today, to a greater or lesser extent between organizations. The build on that you get with the term currency is this idea of exchange, of being able to spend and receive. And in my opinion, my personal opinion, I don't think we're all the way there yet. And I don't think we'll be there until we as consumers, just speaking from a consumer perspective, until we as consumers have got the ability to monetize and control our own data. Now, there's lots of laws and legislation out there at the moment around data protection and what you can and can't do. If you want to go and ask for your data to be deleted by businesses, you can absolutely go and do that.
Yeah.
To a greater and lesser extent, worldwide, GDPR is the big protection in Europe and really is the kind of the gold standard for this. But imagine a world where you can sell your assets, your data, to a business or rent it to them. So rather than giving away your interests and the things you want to engage with as you go around the web, what about that if that was held in a vault, and that vault was paid for by a brand who would want to then engage you in a particular way? Now, isn't that really powerful? They get something and you get something. Now, where's that money going today? That money today is going to the large platforms, right? This is Google's business model. This is Meta's business model, 100%. But I think there's still more change to come in that. And some businesses have tried it. Some startups have tried to create this. But it's such a seismic shift in the economics of the web that we haven't made it there yet. But when that happens, I think that's when it'll be truly a currency and out of the asset catalogue.
Do you think we have the technology, or are we close to having the technology that would make that kind of ownership possible for the consumer?
I think we do, yeah. And for me, that's where blockchain comes in. So having the ability to store your data in an individual, privacy compliant way that can't be affected by anybody else externally, that I think will be the underpinning technology as we see it today to drive this kind of capability. But we're by no means there just yet. And as I say, I think the economics of the web will have to change in order for that to become a reality.
I completely agree. And I think with so much regulation being put around the giants like Meta and how they're using our data, and now, OpenAI and also Google, I think legislation is coming and they are decentralizing and aiming to empower the consumer as well. So I think we're getting there, but like you're saying, I think it's on one side, it's the way we're looking at who owns the data right now. So, the platforms do, but also there's that exchange of power and decentralization, like Mandy said, that is dictated by governments or by the European Union now from above, saying, look, we actually need to make people more in charge of.
And also consumer habits, I guess, to a certain extent. Like when you go onto a website or a platform, you're so quick to be like, I'll just tick that box. But actually, if you have the power back in your hands, like the patterns of behavior, I think will be really interesting to see how that.
But also think about it this way, right? Because it's not a one-way street. The web that we experience and enjoy today is paid for mostly by advertising. Okay,
that's true.
And so if you like getting all those services for free, hey, guess what? You are paying for it with your data. There is already that exchange going on, which is why I talk about the economics of the web would need to change. And we saw some of this a few years ago with the introduction of paywalls and micropayments to access particular pieces of content. But you're absolutely right. Consumer behavior would need to change as well. We'd have to accept that, oh my God, I can't just go onto a website and have all of these services delivered for free. I need to give something of value, all right? And that I might have to pay for something. Oh my goodness, you need to pay for something to access a website? Imagine the restriction there. So it's not a simple process, and there are multiple dynamics that are coming into this. I think there is a shift. I think you're absolutely right, Bianca. I think there is a shift towards the ownership of data, but it will need to take some big changes, some big shifts in the way that the web works today.
And just to take this one step further, I think there's also into the near future there will be much more content generated by AI. And because right now, we're paying for content. Yes, we're paying for the platform and the infrastructure and the maintenance of the platform, but also we're paying a lot for content. Just to give an example, like YouTube or Medium. But there's an interesting question there around, okay, well, now that content is being created automatically by AI and is being generated at a faster pace than ever before, then where does that leave us? And how do we access that kind of content? And then you spiral down into like the quality and the curation of that content and so on. But we'll have to see where we're going.
Yeah, and do users value content that's being generated by an AI as highly as they value it being generated by a human? I mean, if you go on LinkedIn, you'll see a lot of content created directly by AIs, and I have to say, I mean, I can you spot it a mile off, and there's a significant drop in quality. That human element is so critical.
It's not engaging. Just to bring it down to like my job, for example. So I coach our students here at Holt on their LinkedIn profiles, and I fix their CVs in some instances. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, "What are you telling me here?" And I can't get to the bottom of the page, right? So I think there's a long way to go in terms of if we have this kind of digitized content. Like, I don't know how people's attentions will stay there, because from what we're seeing right now, it's
not great.
It's not great.
But it's being refined, because we've only seen the first few versions of it. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. I think that there will be a lot of great progress in that space. But I'm hijacking the conversation, so I'll go back to the point.
Just to maybe close off this point. So there's, in terms of content that's created, you're absolutely right. If you think about we'll talk about generative AI, I think, in a while. But if you think about how generative AI works, it's trained on, many of the models are trained on the content across the web. Now, what happens when half of that content is already generated by AI?
Yeah.
I think there's a consensus forming really that content which is generated by AI should have a watermark that says that it has been generated by AI.
Sure.
And can track whether that's imagery or copy, so that we can distinguish, and so that people understand who and what has written the thing that they're reading.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And then there's the final concept there around AI hallucination, which just the term in itself is quite big, which refers to the time when AI produces information that is incorrect. So if you go into ChatGPT and you ask it, you give it a fake question. So you're asking, who is Queen Bianca of, Nairobi from the 7th century, right? Like, didn't exist. On 3% of the cases, ChatGPT, if you give it the right prompt, or in this case, the wrong prompt, it will fabricate some information about me as a queen back in the day, which is quite exciting. But there is that question of like how accurate when it's not just about spotting it, but it's also about how accurate is information produced by AI.
Yeah, and obviously the big models are working very hard to reduce the hallucinations, as you say, that are appearing today. And if you think about the scale that we're talking about, and maybe we're getting slightly into the weeds on large language models, but you'll hear when you read about the large language models, the size of the model and how important that is. The fact that GPT 3.5 was sort of tens of billions of parameters, and GPT-4, I think, are around 1.7 trillion parameters, right? And what does that mean? Right? So for anybody who needs a bit of a representation in their mind about these parameters, what the model is trying to do is to predict something. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so if we think about a really simple model where you have, you're trying to predict a house price, and you have the one axis, you have the square footage, and on the other axis, you have the price. Okay. And you plot all of the houses in your local area, the size of the house versus the cost, and you'll end up with a sort of a rough line. And then you draw a line of best fits, and I'm sure everyone kind of remembers line of best fits from school. Right, that's a model, a predictive model, because there's your line of best fit. Mm-hmm. There's a predictive model using 2 parameters. Okay, that's a 2-parameter model. We're talking about 1.7 trillion parameters, which is why these models have the incredible ability to predict what comes next. And really, that's how they work, right? They both from a text perspective, they're just guessing what's the highest probability of what word will come next in this sequence. And the same goes with the image models. So, that concept is absolutely incredible. And these models are getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time we see a release. And the technology is also improving. And the underlying hardware, if you watch any of the broadcasts from NVIDIA and the work that they're doing, the incredible research work of the new chips that they're producing to try to manage all of this huge amount of data. Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Speaking of processing data, let's go back to the basics a little bit and think of data literacy and data fluency, which in the context of AI, might seem like baby steps, but I think it's important to articulate how essential these skills have become in such a short time span for all of us. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that data fluency is becoming the new must-have skill for all workers here in the Middle East, if we just zoom in, regardless of the function they have, whether it's operations, sales, marketing, whatever they do they need to have the data fluency skills?
Actually, this is a really evolving space. So first of all, let's just look at data, right? What do we actually mean? Is it bits and bytes? It's structured data. Can you put it into a table and understand it? If I look at my last 10 runs that I've done, the distance and the time that it took, nice structured data like that. But data is all around us and appears in multiple formats. So think about the large language models that are being built. The data there is unstructured. It's in written format. It could be recorded voice. It could be imagery. All of this is examples of data. And so when you talk about data fluency, from my perspective, I think it's important that individuals have an appreciation of different types of data, what it can't do, what the different uses and the different uses for it. But actually, the emergence of generative AI, and we've really dived into generative AI very, very early on, but it is such a game changer. It's empowering us to do things that we've never been able to do before. If you want to ask a large language model to create a particular calculation, then you can ask it to create a calculation. You can ask it in natural language to do that. And so, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you might need to become proficient at Excel. And, tell me, how is your VLOOKUP?
Putting me on the spot. Not great, I have to say.
Right. But that's what we had to do. I remember sort of 15 years ago plus, I went on an Excel course and I learned how to do it. And then I ended up building these sort of big models in Excel.
Yeah.
But now I can ask the machine to do that for me. So I think this idea of data fluency is really kind of an evolving space. Understand the core, understand the principles that sit behind it. And you've now got an assistant. And that assistant can help you with the calculations and so on. But you do need to understand, is it giving you what you want? And importantly, and I think this is always true with AI, you need to be able to ask the right questions. Okay. And so that's why I say, understand the basics, understand what the questions are, and then you can get a machine to do much of the rest of it.
So in terms of skills that we need to be able to use it is critical thinking, the thing that's at the top. And then just to circle back to something you said, you can leverage the tools to help you with Excel. In order to look at the results critically, you still need to know how to use it.
Exactly that.
Yeah, okay.
And if we go one step further and we think about how much of our day-to-day jobs are being augmented by AI, what are you thinking there, Harry, around people needing to kind of jump on the AI wagon and start familiarizing themselves with the technology and using it? Because is there a scenario where in the next 5 years, if you're not using it to augment your work, you're behind and you're not competitive enough, and then others are just, succeeding at a much, much faster rate than you?
Yeah, I think people make a variety of predictions in this space. From what I've seen, that there's anything between 40 to 60% is the average of the impact of jobs. So 40 to 60% of jobs, or 40 to 60% of your working time will be impacted in one way or another by AI, which is a significant amount. So yes, is the simple answer. We all need to constantly learn, upskill, evolve with the way that we work. But I think it's not a direct replacement. This is a AI augmented workforce that we'll see. And that AI augmented workforce really is about efficiency, but it's also about growth. The businesses, the organizations which are going to succeed are not those who are trying to take out cost, but those who are trying to reapportion their assets, people, investment, wherever else it might be, in their growth agenda. And so if they can drive efficiency in one area and then reinvest that somewhere else, that's who's really going to succeed. And certainly for me, in the workforce, I would say anybody entering the workforce, you need to have the core skills around particularly generative AI. Generative AI is really a democratization of AI. For many years, I've worked with AI and data science teams, and they are incredible, and the work they do is just amazing, but many people don't understand it. And if you don't understand it, it doesn't become mainstream. If it's not mainstream, then it doesn't have the potential impact that it could have. What generative AI does is it puts it all into our own hands. I mean, I'm sure we've all used ChatGPT for your intro today, or Gemini or others. And so everybody should have those skills. And skills-wise, for me, I mean, there are some basics to get started. The first is prompting. And there are innumerable websites, posts, whatever else about the different ways that you can structure prompts. The best way that I found is to have some structures and then just go and do it. Give yourself a task, give yourself a job to do, and then go in and find the best way to execute that task. I think the tools that are out there are getting better and better at kind of accepting just pure natural language, but the better we are at prompting, the higher quality the output that you'll get. So that for me would be my advice to anybody. Understand prompting.
Just go play with it.
Go play with it. Understand prompting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also keeping in mind, it is a very iterative interaction. So you ask, that's me every day. I have conversations with ChatGPT for about 10, 15 minutes. Even writing this prompt, it took me a few tries, because you go and you ask it to do something and it does it in its own kind of way, with lots of extra words, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And as a little kind of anecdote, when I asked it to write an intro to our podcast, which is focused on AI and Dubai, and I asked it to be specific, it went into all sorts of wrong cultural stereotypes about Dubai and camels and Bedouin coffee and all the things. And I said, now try again without offending anyone. So, but I think it's...
Please try not to offend anybody with the introduction.
Offend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it actually a great example of that augmented AI workforce, right? Because you cannot take the people out of this. We think about the business that I'm in. So one of the things that I've been showing to clients over the last few weeks and months is the ability to create new marketing campaigns using one of the tools we've developed. And through this process, I still need human skills. I still need the inquisitiveness and the critical thought, as you rightly say, to derive an insight. But then when I'm going to create a marketing campaign, I need that creative eye. For me, there's a creative director who is sitting there working with these tools. And I always think about them as an assistant, or a highly educated new graduate who's just joined the business. They don't have any experience. So they need very clear prompting and direction in order to understand what it is that they're supposed to do. And then when something is produced, you can then go back and iterate. And the best tools will also learn from that process as well. So that there's a real parallel with that mindset of, this is just a naive, highly educated, highly skilled person that is my assistant, and now we all have them sitting with us every day.
I love that analogy, actually, and I think it will contextualize the tool, I think, for a lot of people. So we've talked a lot about how people are using generative AI, and we'd like to switch gears a little bit to talk about how businesses are using it. So we looked at the Accenture website, and it showed that almost half of CXOs mentioned data readiness as the top challenge to applying generative AI. Can you explain what is meant by data readiness in the context of implementing AI?
I can. And maybe something that would just be useful before we jump into that is just talk a little bit about, I know we've spoken about generative AI quite a lot already because, well,
we love it.
We love it. And I talk about it all day, every day. But it's worth just thinking about, why is it so new? I mean, it's been with us for 18 months, right? The first ChatGPT was released to the public in November 2022. It's been with us for 18 months. And what an evolution, even in that short space of time. And then you track it back, and there was a paper put out by Google in 2017, which was kind of really the start of this. And I remember the startup that I worked in, this was probably 2016, 2017, an early version. One of our data scientists created a kind of an early version of this where he created 2 rap songs based on inputs. And it wasn't a true LLM, it wasn't, but what it did do, it wrote lyrics, and our CEO in one of our town halls raps. And we had to guess which rap song was generated by a computer and which one was real. And we all got it wrong because both of them were created by a computer. It's absolutely amazing. But maybe just to talk a little bit about narrow AI, as it's often referred to, and what generative AI can do. AI is really good at finding patterns. And really that has been the use case of a lot of AI up to this point. But there are some other considerations as well. It often needs to be trained for a very specific job. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you want... Let's think about how AI is used, right? Facial recognition, or let's keep it even simpler than that, animal recognition. So if I want an AI to tell me whether something is a picture of a cat or not, I show it lots and lots of pictures of cats, And then that's its training data. Remember, it's like a highly intelligent thing. And also sometimes at a very early stage, it's like a baby. Okay. With my sons, I remember, here's a picture. What sound does that make? Right. This is a cat. Okay. So what are the features? It's got pointy ears. It's got a triangular sort of shaped nose. It's got whiskers, right? Maybe those are the factors that we look for. What GenAI has enabled is a more general model that is trained to do lots and lots of things. And so, if you look at GPT itself, right? Generative, pre-trained transformer. So it can generate new original content. It's pre-trained, which means that all of the work has been done, or a lot of the work has been done to give that model intelligence, and so that it can perform lots of different tasks. And it's a transformer model, which is a particular type of machine learning model that works very well with things in sequence. So putting one word in front of another is a good use case for that. So the distinction there, really, and the biggest distinction, is that a GenAI model produces something that is original, a brand new original content, which AI previously hasn't been brilliant at. Okay, so AI has been important for businesses. So back to your question about data readiness. Sorry, I took us on a bit of a tangent, but it's worthwhile. But AI has been used and available by businesses for a long time. And within that, you're absolutely right. Data readiness, I think that the stat on our site is 47% of CXOs say so they don't have the data ready to use. And it is foundational in the performance of these models. If you don't have the right data to put in, you're not going to get the highest quality output. So what do we mean by data readiness? There are a few things to consider. Right, the first is around data quality. So is it accurate, consistent? Is it complete? So if you think about again, from a consumer business, if I look at the database of all of my customers, do I have the names and addresses, maybe, location? Do I have accurate information about the consumer channels that they like to engage through? Do I have full data about what they've bought from me? And if I'm missing things, then the model is understandably going to be wrong. If I want to train it to predict what somebody might buy, and so, a recommendation engine, then if it doesn't have all the data, then it's not going to get it right. Right? If it's missing whole categories or it's missing, it's just not going to be right. So data quality is very, very important. The second point is around data integration and mobility. So businesses for a long time, and still a problem for many, is they're collecting data, but it sits in silos. So the marketing team has got some data, the sales team has got some data, product team has got some data, supply chain has got some data. Now, what we want is to be able to bring all of that together. And so I now I understand, if I market in this way, this is what people buy, and this is what I need to deliver. And that integrated system is going to perform much better than the value of those data points sitting separately. Thirdly, we look at data governance. Hugely important. We've already spoken about privacy today, but having a system and a structure of how you are looking after the data within your business is absolutely critical, and particularly if it involves personal data. Even more so if that data becomes sensitive. So anything in the life sciences or medical sector, for example, it's absolutely imperative that remains well governed, that is only used for the purposes and the context that it's given for, and to not do anything else. We also then, as part of all this, we need to think about sort of the underlying architecture, right? And I don't really get into the weeds on this, but it's what are the systems that allow the data to be stored securely and to be transported around the system, again, securely in a privacy compliant way. Data engineering as well, which again is a bit of the same. How do you maybe need to transform the structure of data from one place or one part of the business into another part of the business? And again, I won't get into the weeds too much on this. There are some tools which have been developed, some platforms which make this much easier. Things like customer data platforms, which is a system which unifies a customer's record from multiple systems. And then lastly, and I think probably most importantly, is organizational alignment. And that's an understanding and a cultural appreciation within the organization of the value of data and how it's used. And so if those aspects of data readiness aren't there, then you're trying to build an engine with half of the parts and with no fuel.
Question on that then, alignment and readiness, just to kind of bring it back to what you're seeing here in the region, because obviously we've just come from, the UAE, for example, and the GCC has been on a digital transformational journey over the last few years. So do large corporates here, for example, have the right mindset for this, and or is there the other four components still needing to be put in place?
I think for businesses, the ambition is absolutely there. Depending on the industry, there may be some existing challenges around legacy architecture that they have, and fundamentally the cost that's involved to modernize all of that. And I think depending on the industry here, retail has been pretty good, staying up to date. They usually have pretty good systems, but some of the other industries, particularly sort of around industrial and so on, may not be in that same place. The ambition is absolutely there, and that's fundamentally the start. And I think the understanding and appreciation of data has made its way firmly onto the board table, and now is the time that the changes that we're seeing, the changes starting to be made.
Amazing. And Harry, could we talk a bit about the application of AI in business, which is what you've just started mentioning, but if we can dive a bit deeper, just to understand what the reward is for those businesses that are hitting the data readiness points that you just mentioned. They get themselves ready and they're ready to hit the ground running. How do they win? What's the reward? Why should they do it?
So many ways. Here's an example here, actually, of a business who is amazing with data, right? If you think about Amazon. Amazon are often held up as the shining light in many things. The experience that they've created, their diversification of business. I mean, who would thought that an online bookstore would be one of the world's biggest cloud computing providers and media businesses and everything else? Now, Amazon are incredible that they've always been very good with their data. They use data in a number of different ways, everything from the product recommendations that you see, collaborative filtering mechanism, as it's called. People like you also bought this, or people bought this, also looked at this. They're very good at that on the experience side. But we spoke earlier on about the currency versus asset. Their data asset is absolutely huge. They know an awful lot about me. I was in my own previous orders section of my Amazon account, and it amazed me how much stuff I've bought
since 2017.
Right. a huge amount that really tracks me as an individual. And something we speak about in the Accenture Song quite a lot is about being life centric. So we've gone from being business centric. How do I, as a business, I build a product and then I go and find a market. That turned into customer centric. I want to understand the customer. We talk about being life centric, and by life centric, I mean we are multiple things all at one time. I'm this person at work. I'm also a father, and I have I have my friends that I want to go on holiday with. Outside of that, I like my sport. I like musical theatre. Things that you might not necessarily put together, but all of a sudden, as a brand, I now want to target all aspects there. And Amazon is amazing at that, right? Because they've tracked all of the parts that go along. And so one of the things that they've done very successfully is to build a retail media business. What this is they're utilizing they're selling or leasing the data that they have on their consumers and their consumer trends. They're renting that to brands who want to advertise against it. So they allow them to do better targeting of advertising to you and me based on what we've done on Google. And this is a huge part of their business. This is $45 billion a year business. It is absolutely enormous. And this concept of retail media, so retailers selling data to brands to advertise on media, right? That's the connection. Mm-hmm. It's over $100 billion value in the US, and it's growing sort of between 15 and 20% year on year. Absolutely amazing. Now there's an example of a business that uses data incredibly well, not only for its own purposes, but to develop new products and services off the back of it. But most businesses aren't Amazon. So we look for those individual use cases. The utilization of data can impact in so many different ways. I see a lot of the consumer facing pieces around personalization, around providing better service, around identifying new products and services that a business can provide, around targeting for marketing and advertising. But we can also look at operations, right? How well does a supply chain run? I was working with a pharmaceutical business. Pharmaceuticals, extremely high value, but need to be maintained at a certain temperature, etc., as they're transported around the world. So having that logistics train absolutely is critical, because otherwise you end up with wastage, which is hugely costly, and not only costly, but could impact the delivery of somebody's medicine. And so having all of that data available and being able to respond to it is critical. If we think about asset management for asset intensive businesses, if you're a utilities business or a construction business, a utilities business has got hundreds of sensors on every part of their equipment, and they don't want anything to break because nobody wants a blackout. Nobody wants to be, having to go to some backup systems. And so they look at every single aspect of those parts of their energy supply chain to understand how is it performing and what can we understand predictively to get ahead of any problems. It's easier and cheaper to solve a problem before it happens than to sort it out afterwards. So there are lots and lots of different ways. I could spend an awful long time going industry by industry, but from a consumer angle, the promise has been this drive towards one-to-one personalization. And that's about relevance. Understand what I want, when I want it, life centricity. In this moment, this is my need. And that's why we as consumers give our data to brands so that they can respond to us in that way.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for the insights. And I think we talked about so much today around AI and why it's amazing and why we love it. But if we look to the flip side, AI, empowering AI and making it available to everyone to the extent to which we've discussed today is very energy consuming, and it's putting a strain on the energy supply we have globally. And some figures say that to power AI and make it available to everyone takes about 1% of the entire energy consumption in the world. Now, I don't necessarily expect you to have a solution to this, but I'm just wondering if you're aware of any ways in which we are trying to tackle this problem, because sustainability is such a big issue for us today.
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic and one that every business should be aware of. Everybody should have a view of sustainability and the value that they can bring as an organization to reduce emissions, etc. You're right, this technology consumes a lot of power. I saw an estimate that running ChatGPT for a day is the same as running 400 to 800 households in the US.
Wow.
Right? A huge amount. So certainly something that needs to be taken into consideration. I've seen a few things on this. I think a really developing area. I think the underlying hardware is getting better. Everybody is trying to reduce the amount of power that it takes. Economically, from a cost perspective, we want to make this more readily available at a more cost-effective rate. But there are some great stories where data centers, there's one, I think it's in the UK, that's being used to heat a local leisure center. And so, the cooling water that flows through it now goes back into the swimming pool. And if we think about that, think about all the waste that happens. We've got cooling towers and everything else. But then we also have heaters in our homes. How do we find a way to combine those two? And then the other thing that I think is really interesting is how businesses are putting data centers closer to the source of power, because you lose power the further the electricity travels. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to get those marginal benefits by putting it closer to the source itself. So I think people are thinking about this. I think that there are some small moves in the right direction, but definitely an area that we all want to see a huge improvement for the true democratization of the AI technology.
Fantastic. I think it's a good way to finish the conversation on a step towards a positive direction. Thank you, Harry, for contextualizing big data and AI for us today. I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about, and actually some areas of opportunity as well, I think. So we appreciate that. We are going to give you a bit of a taster of the question we want to ask you in our bonus episode, and also for our listeners to think about how they also would respond themselves. So, in May 2024, the EU has adopted the AI Act, which is the world's first set of legislation on how businesses can use AI. There is a clear concern about the balance between business opportunity and citizen risk. And this act is putting some red tape around sensitive issues like biometrics, deepfakes, misinformation. In your opinion, what are some priorities that the UAE legislators need to keep in mind when regulating this space? A big question there for you. And for our listeners, please join our bonus episode and we will get into it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you both. This has been very fun.
Good. We're glad.